Hello, I'm Eros from Civic Roots presenting our first podcast series, Voice for the Voiceless. In this podcast, we interview people whose history is being forgotten, and it is our focus to preserve this history's oral culture and archive the experiences of the most vulnerable people in America. In this first collection of podcasts, we hear the experiences of a black Southern family who recall their history since the Civil War, through the Jim Crow era and the Civil Rights Movement. Our guest speaker today is Raymond Macon Jr., an eclectic educator drawing lessons and lectures from a range of subjects including science, civics, and history. Throughout his life, Raymond has dedicated much of his time to educating people on Black America. He explains the struggles of his ancestors that have been passed down for 130 years, which parallels the reality of American history. So without further ado, here is Raymond Macon Jr.
Okay, Aaron, I think this will be better.
Yeah, me too. All right, so I know your grandfather was born in 1895, and he refused to talk about his parents. He
Right.
wouldn't even name them.
No, and this was typical of my family, on both sides of my family, I might add. My mother's parents, just as shut mouth, just as closed mouth, say nothing about their parents. What I've learned about my mother's family, I learned from Ancestry.com. Only once did my maternal grandmother mention her parents, and that was only because she decided one day she was going to visit their grave in Birmingham.
Your maternal
My
grandparents.
maternal grandmother,
Okay.
yes. She took us, and we went to see where Woodrow and Ida Allen buried. I've only been there once. Couldn't find my way back there. My life depended on it.
Hmm.
So that was my maternal grandmother. My maternal grandfather was born in 1892. My maternal grandmother was born in 1900, very last year of the 19th century.
Hmm.
My maternal grandfather was a very, very intelligent and capable man. I never learned what he wanted to do with his life. He served in France. There he was wounded. He was supposed to get the Purple Heart because of his wound. But like so many black servicemen, he was denied that recognition and honor and passed over for it. I had thought, and I should have done this many years ago actually, I had thought of writing to the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense and asking that my grandfather be recognized with a posthumous Purple Heart. No way in hell I'm going to do that with this bastard in office now.
Hmm.
I'll pass that on to my nieces and nephews to pursue. That's what they want to do. At any rate, my paternal grandfather, Lorenzo Macon, was the oldest child of Pearl and Arthur. He had 8 other siblings. I have never met any of them. Some of them are still around here in Birmingham.
The following section of Raymond's interview left out several words and phrases. Because it may be hard to understand the telephone quality of conversation, I have added subtitles to this section below.
When I would talk to my grandfather about meeting him, he just wouldn't do anything about it. I have run into someone else here in Birmingham. His name is Perry Macon. He claims to be kin to us. That wouldn't surprise me. So I'm going to try to run him down. My sister has some information that will allow us to contact him. But getting back to my great-grandparents, Earl and Arthur and Ida Allen. My maternal grandfather is a man named Henry Hall. His full name is actually Robert Henry Hall.
Mm-hmm.
My paternal grandfather was rejected for military service. He had flat feet, they said. So he did not fight the Great War. Both of my grandmothers passed for white women. They never talked about their fathers. I believe that their fathers were white men. That's what we had gathered from Ancestry.com anyway.
Okay.
So at any rate, unended Birmingham. It became a town due to steel. This is the only place known on the entire surface of the planet. 3 ingredients needed for making steel can come. Iron ore, coal, and limestone is here, Birmingham. Both of my grandfathers made their way to Birmingham to work in the steel mills here. 73% of the steel workers in Birmingham were black men. None of them ever promoted to management and any kind of supervisory position. They were all front laborers. Money was good, and you could make a decent living. My grandmother, I don't know, but Lorenzo Macon, and everybody called him Ren.
Mm.
Ren Macon met Leela Atkins. He was smitten. He fell head over heels for her. She was a widow, 5 children. That did not matter to Ren. He went on ahead and married her anyway. And as the old song says, she must have had kisses sweeter than wine, because they went on to have 6 kids more of their own, of whom my father was the youngest. Henry eventually got to working for a place called Stockham, Stokha, Stockham, that made steel pipes and valves. That was one of the steel concerns here in Birmingham. Another one was ACIPCO, ACIPCO, American Cast Iron and Pipe Company. A lot of men worked for ACIPCO. My grandfather worked for what was called TCI, Tennessee Coaling Institute. The TCI eventually was bought out by U.S. Steel. Steel meant everything here. Birmingham produced more steel than Pittsburgh ever did. Those were the days when you see a lot of, they called thermal inversions, atmospheric conditions that would trap air near the ground, and so steel mills were belching out all these fumes. That's what you'd see. And custom in my family was that when summer vacation time came, oftentimes you would be packed off to spend the summer with relatives. So it was customary for us to come to Birmingham and spend the summer with my father's parents. And of course, we got to see my mother's parents as well. I can remember as a boy looking down towards the steelworks in Inslee and Fairfield. Those are 2 suburbs of Birmingham. And seeing this veil of rust-colored smoke over those 2 towns, and of course that was over us where we lived in Birmingham as well. So that's what Birmingham was. It was also, in its day, the most segregated city in America.
Wow.
My father did not talk much about what it was like to grow up in the 1930s. He was born in 1932.
Okay.
And what it was like to grow up in the 1930s as a black person here in Birmingham. Daddy didn't talk much about that at all.
Yeah.
My mother said some things.
Okay. What did she say?
One of the things that she talked about the most was the public transit system in Birmingham.
Mm.
In those days, you got on a bus and you took a seat and you sat and everything else. You were black. A white person wanted your seat and asked you for it. You had to give it up. And my mother talked about that.
Wow.
She said that, well, white folks were nice when they would ask you, mean or anything like that, but you were still obliged to give that seat.
Mm.
That was state law, not just Birmingham City law. That was state law in Alabama.
I just don't understand how white people are not okay with sitting in the back of the bus.
It's what I was talking to a good friend of mine in Boulder yesterday, and comes from the South himself. He comes from North Carolina. And I've talked to you about Kevin and Debbie Brown.
Yeah, I've met them.
Yeah. I was talking to Kevin yesterday, and I told him that we were talking about segregation, and see, people were taught that this was natural, this was normal, that we as blacks were inherently inferior, and so it was only right for white folks to have the best things here. So my mother would tell me, they'd come up to her and, oh, sweetheart, can I have your seat? And my mother would graciously get up and move somewhere else, and they would take the seat.
Hmm.
Schools were segregated. Bus segregation, you come down here, we'll see if we can arrange for us to go to Montgomery.
That would be great.
Alabama's capital. That's where the state capital is.
Mm-hmm.
Where there is still a statue to Jefferson Davis on the portico of the state capitol. Montgomery was the first capital of the Confederacy. The Confederacy had 3 capitals. A lot of people don't even know that.
Mm.
Montgomery was the first capital. That is where Jefferson Davis was sworn in as president of the Confederacy. Alexander Stephens, his vice president. That was in February of 1861. The segregation and giving up your seats on buses was the law of Alabama.
Wow. Raymond, one question. Is this still the influence of the Jim Crow laws in the South?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And when did
Absolutely.
that started at the end of the 1800s, right?
Yes. The Jim Crow laws began to take effect starting in 1877.
Oh, okay.
Happened in 1877. Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president of the United States. It was a disputed election. It's 15 electoral votes dispute. Hayes was running against a man named Samuel Tilden. Whoever got those electoral votes would be president of the United States. Hayes cut a deal with Southern Democrats.
Mm.
You give me those electoral votes and I become president of the United States, I will end construction in the South.
Mm. Right.
Now, Reconstruction was being enforced and reinforced by the presence of federal troops.
Mm-hmm.
Remained in the South after the Confederacy was defeated and destroyed.
The Reconstruction also ratified the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment.
Exactly. And black people held political office
Yeah.
in the South, throughout the South.
Wow. To go from 16 years after the Civil War, the reaction for white folks who were used to slavery now seeing a black man become a politician.
Yeah. The South was divided into 5 districts.
Hmm.
And the 11 Confederate states had to apply readmission to the Union. See, they don't teach that in school anymore, I don't think.
No, I wouldn't think so either. I wasn't taught.
They had to reapply. And they had to ratify the 13th Amendment as well.
No slavery.
Tennessee did so in 1866. Georgia was the last in 1871. But the troops remained. And all the more so because in 1868, the Ku Klux Klan was born.
Was that a response to the federal troops being there?
Oh, yes. And in response to these free blacks who could, first, goddammit, free. That was the 13th Amendment. Then the 14th Amendment. Now the niggers are citizens of the United States. Can you believe that bullshit? They are citizens. That's what the 14th Amendment did. And then the 15th Amendment, well, goddammit, now they can vote.
That's right.
But we can't have that. Who the hell do these people think they are? See, they remember what Alexander Stephens said when he was sworn in as Vice President of the Confederacy. Our government is founded on the great truth that the Negro cannot be equal to the white man.
That is some fucking bullshit truth.
But that's what they believe. Now do you see where these Jim Crow laws come from?
Yeah.
And where pardon segregation came from?
A response of hate.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
White folks were determined to get back their own. So Hayes made the deal with the Southern Democrats. They voted, therefore, a congressional committee was set up to determine who would get the electoral votes. The Democrats threw their support behind Hayes. He was elected president of the United States, took office in 1877, and he withdrew the federal troops.
Wow.
The South. They were redeployed, and that's an interesting story, too, where they were redeployed. They were sent to Utah.
Oh, yeah. The Mormons next, right? First we got to take care of the Southerners, then the Mormons.
That's where they went. Utah was under federal occupation. 1877, 1878, let's say, till 1920. Utah wasn't even allowed to elect its own governor. That's something else that's been wiped out of the American history books, too. So at any rate, you had Jim Crow. Rigid, unyielding, unbreakable segregation.
That lasted until the mid-20th century?
Yes.
Wow. That's a long time. Almost 100 years.
Almost 100 years.
Wow.
So that was what was going on. The idea was to keep the Negro in his place. That's what white folks said. We're going to keep the Negro in his place. We're going to remind him what his place is, and it is not the same as ours.
Pretty aggressive response. That can only come from hate.
Yeah, that's what it is. It was in the midst of this kind of politics and reality that both of my grandfathers came to Birmingham. Even though you couldn't get advancement to get a job, they did. My grandfather came here to Smithfield, Birmingham. He bought a house that still stands. It was the house where my father was born. And the welcoming committee in Smithfield paid him a visit.
The welcoming...
And that was the Ku Klux Klan.
That's what I thought.
Not too many black folks lived in Smithfield in those days. But they told my grandfather that they would not harass him. They considered him a decent man. So he would be allowed to stay in that house and raise his family.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to just think what it must have been like to be a black man being told by the Ku Klux Klan that you are a decent gentleman.
Yeah. I remember once when I talked about the Ku Klux Klan to some kids at Sherilyn Sing School.
Mm-hmm.
And kids looked at me and Aaron, I mean, you could tell they were shaken.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe this. Mr. Macon, that can't be true. Yes, it is. Then I asked my students, I said, tell me, by a show of hands, how many of you think that the Jim Crow laws were dumb, stupid? All these hands went up. Every hand in the classroom went up. And I looked at the kids and I told them, you're wrong. Wrong? Yes, you're wrong. There's nothing dumb or stupid about the Jim Crow laws. They were evil. See, and that goes beyond being dumb and stupid, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
They were evil. And you must learn to recognize evil, because it wears many disguises. And see, that I'm saying that so you can understand why people went along with it. They didn't see it. They didn't see it that way.
Right.
That's the point. They didn't think that this was evil.
That's scary. They didn't think it was evil.
No, they did not. They did not see it as evil. No more than their ancestors saw black slavery as evil.
Yeah. So we've come to the end of the Jim Crow laws.
In 1950s and 1960s. The end of the Jim Crow laws did not mean, well, Jim Crow took a long time to dismantle.
Right.
And in the 1960s, time of great ferment and unrest, here in the South, it was the fight against segregation. As I told you, Birmingham was the most segregated city in America in those days. People here were not going to take that line down. There were protests. There were marches. People were lynched.
Wow.
And government in the South, you think of city government, most people will tell you, well, you have a mayor and a city council. That was not true here in the South. Instead, you had a three-man commission that ran the cities. You had a commissioner for public safety. That was the police chief. You had the fire commissioner. And then you had a commissioner, I've forgotten whose office, what his responsibility was. Three commissioners were elected to terms. The title of mayor was rotated among the three. That's how things were done. Why were they done that way? Well, if you have a mayor and a council, God damn it, niggas will be serving on the city council. Too many of them, can't keep them out. They'd be voted into office. If I have a commission, that's going to shut them out. Because there are only 3 seats, you see. And blacks aren't going to get enough votes to get one of those seats. That's why it was done.
Right. So what was the reaction from the civil rights movement? And what was it like growing up during that time? And what kind of experiences did you have as a black Southern man?
Well, some of it was I didn't see myself, but all about. One that stands out most, and the one that I shared with the kids in Inglewood, was the day when the Commissioner for Public Safety, Gene Connor, came here to Smithfield, on this very street where I'm living now. Brought a squadron of his all-white police force with him. Brought his attack dogs with him, too. Connor himself wasn't content to come in a car. He came in a tank. Where he got this tank from, I do not know. But he came in a tank. He swiveled the gun turret around, pointing it at people's homes, at the homes of my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, our neighbors. Now, this hill that I live on, got the name Dynamite Hill because many people who were involved with the civil rights movement here, and they too got visits from the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan came not to talk, to kill if they could, as much damage otherwise. So they bombed people's homes here.
Outrageous.
Planting dynamite basements on their property. That's why this is Dynamite Hill. So Connor came here in a tank. That was in 1963. That was the year that the Klan bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church. Young girls there for Sunday school. This was on Sunday, September 15th, 1963. Just less, I think, than 3 weeks after Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. This was the Klan's response to that.
So 4 little girls died in the bombings.
Yeah. 2 of them, my family knew. So in those days, learn to watch your step. I was living in Pennsylvania in the 1960s. And I spent the summers of 1964, 1965, 1967, 1969. Spent those summers here in Birmingham. And I knew that I had to watch my step.
Where in Pennsylvania were you living?
Outside of Philadelphia, in a town called Phoenixville. Only 4 miles from Valley Forge. I was born.
And Pennsylvania was considered a part of the Union. Was it a slave state?
When the United States was founded, all 13 colonies allowed slavery. Benjamin Franklin owned slaves.
Right.
That's something a lot of people do not know. Slavery was primarily in the South. But there were some other places, though it was not supposed to be allowed, but it existed. California was one of them. Yes, there was slavery in California. Not much, but there was some. In Oklahoma was another. Although slave owners in Oklahoma were not white men, Native Americans. That too is something that's not talked about. So here in Alabama, I don't want to give the rightful impression that you lived under the shadow of terror.
Right.
As long as you watch your step and remember place, you'd be fine. As long as they left us white folks alone, black people were content with that. But when blacks started agitating voting rights, still talked about the marches here in Birmingham where the police showed up and set their attack dogs on these marchers.
Wow.
Turning water cannon on them. That hasn't been forgotten. When you come here, I'll take you to a place where you will see that commemorated.
Yes, please.
That was taking place here in Birmingham. 1963 was a big turning point here in Alabama. George Wallace became governor of Alabama in 1960. In his inaugural address, he said words that still ring in our ears about his program for Alabama. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever.
Wow.
That's what he said.
Oh, shit.
To prove his point, Wallace ran the Confederate flag over the state capitol. That flag was to fly over Alabama state capitol for more than 30 years.
When was the flag taken down?
Every governor of Alabama flew that goddamn flag. Somebody sued. I forgot who it was, but it's a lawsuit to have the Confederate flag removed. And when the case was heard, the court that the Confederate flag could not fly over the Alabama state capitol. And the reason the Confederate flag could not fly over the Alabama state capitol is that Alabama's state constitution, one that had been adopted in 1901, Alabama's state constitution said the only flags that could fly over the state capitol were the flag of the United States and the flag of the state of Alabama. That was it. So the Confederate flag had to come down.
Wow.
There's an interesting footnote to that, too.
Okay. What's that?
When it was taken down, it was then brought to the first White House of the Confederacy. We will see that as well. That is in Montgomery.
Okay.
It was brought to the first White House of the Confederacy, which is maintained by the Daughters of the Confederacy. They refused to accept the flag.
And who are the Daughters of the Confederacy?
They were there to keep the memory of the Confederacy alive. Even they would not fly that goddamn flag on their property. Even they wouldn't.
Why was that?
I think, and I've talked to many a Confederate sympathizer the years that I've lived in Alabama. See, there's different versions of the Civil War. You've never heard them.
Right.
You haven't lived here.
No.
But for many, it's the lost cause. The Civil War was not fought over slavery. It was fought over states' rights. And Confederate soldiers fought to defend their homes, their farms, their cities, their villages, their families. See, that's what's promoted. And Confederate soldiers were brave, and they were. They were outnumbered and outgunned. There were brave men who fought for the Confederacy. I will never deny that. Hell, members of my family fought for the Confederacy. My family. One of my great uncles, Thomas, served under Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville in Virginia, and then marched with Robert E. Lee to Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. So yeah, even we have a connection to the Confederacy.
Yeah. I think it's cool to see another side of the story.
Yes, and that's important. See, just like we've talked about, well, how could people support Jim Crow? What else were they going to do? That's what they've been told. This is right. This is natural. This is normal.
Right.
Lost the Civil War not because of our generals. Oh, the South had superior military officers. They had men like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and others. And the North, on the other hand, had a leadership that was incompetent in many ways. The Civil War began, there were 9 million people living in the South and 22 million living in the Union states in the North.
Wow. Big difference.
And of the 9 million Southerners, 4 million of them were black slaves.
What? You have almost as many slaves as people?
Yes. Yes. Wonder is that they lasted 4 years. But they did because the Union cause was led by incompetent military officers, incompetent politicians.
Mm-hmm. This is the end of part 2 of this episode with Raymond Macon Jr. I hope you enjoyed listening to his rich history of family lineage. There are many black families that have experienced the same atrocities told here today. Many black Americans have suffered far worse, enduring violence and gruesome murders of loved ones by people committed to their unknown hatred passed down in white Southern culture. There are more stories from Voice for the Voiceless to look forward to in the near future. We have links in the description of our social program charity, along with other content from Civic Roots and new Faceless Studio content. Thanks for listening, and remember, never give in, never give out, and never give up.